Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates, Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Eastern Consolidated, Goldman Properties, the Moynihan Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Triangle Equities.
New York City has some fantastic office and residential buildings. And the family behind them is the name of the Resnicks. And I'm very fortunate to have Burt Resnick, who's the chairman and CEO of Jack Resnick and Sons. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
So let's talk a little bit
By
about...
the way, there are other families who also have residential and commercial.
You know what? I have Mr. Resnick
Right.
today. So, no, there's no question. And that's an interesting thing which we'll get to on the families. But let's talk about the family. Jack was born where? Your father, Jack, was born here?
He was born here in the States, in
And-
New York,
And his
1907.
and his father was a plumber?
He was a plumber.
And your
And
dad...
owned a couple of tenements on Lower Harlem.
Right, 100th Street near Park
Did
Avenue.
101st
Right,
and something like that.
in that
Right near
section.
Mount Sinai.
Right. Now, what happens is in 1928, your dad goes to the Mechanics Institute.
He went to Mechanics Institute and received a course in plumbing. And he went into, because his business was, at that time, managing some Harlem tenements.
And then the Depression came.
Perfect time to go into the real estate business, to go into any business.
But the interesting situation is that the banks went to your dad and said, you know, operate, you know, run some of these buildings.
Yeah, because they couldn't run them.
They couldn't run the buildings. And in certain instances, your father took the money, the commissions, and even took ownership of some of these properties.
Right.
Now, your dad met your mother, who was born in Russia.
Right.
She came over in 1923, and they got married in like 1931, you were saying,
Yeah.
something in that period of time. You were born in
36.
1936. You grew up in the Bronx,
Yes.
where you attend public school and junior high school.
Yeah,
And then you moved to New Rochelle?
New Rochelle.
And
In 49.
in 49, and then you go to the University of Chicago for liberal arts.
In 1953, I graduated high school. I went to the University of Chicago, graduated in 3 years with a Bachelor of Arts degree. Then I stayed there another year and went to the business school. And It was too much. It was enough. I was a big 19 years old when I graduated in '56. So I stayed another year out there, and I came back, and my father made a great offer.
At that time, was the company called Jack Resnick or
No,
Jack Resnick and Sons?
It was Jack Resnick.
When did he created the Sons? Because you have a brother also.
Well, he created his sons in '36 and '49.
Right.
But when I came in, it was Jack Resnick. A number of years later, I guess in late '50s, give or take 1960, he put in Jack Resnick and Son first. And then my brother, my father had great ideas for my brother to come in. He was in California at the time, and he didn't want to, but changed the name of the firm to Jack Resnick and Sons.
Now, at that time, when you joined the company at that time, you know, they were still into the small residential buildings. And you were saying to me that there was one major project that you worked on, which really was like an apprenticeship, was the conversion up in the Bronx of a former movie theater.
It was a Lowe's theater. As a matter of fact, I think, what was his name? Max Lowe, I think. You know, the original Lowe's had his offices there. It was 140 2nd Street and Alexander Avenue. And Safeway stores at that time was building 7,500 and 10,000 square foot freestanding stores, in either freestanding or in taxpayers. And at that time, a 7,500 foot Safeway store most likely should have cost about $60,000 or $70,000, under $10 a foot. And my father, he was a great one for on-the-job training. I knew nothing about building a building outside of watching what he did, because I was a philosophy major at school. The bills came in, and the job cost $100,000 to build. And you would think that a 40% overrun would have made my father furious. No, he was the kind of a guy who said and did say, it's the cheapest education I ever paid for.
Now, in addition to putting the Safeway, did you put a Loehmann's in also at that time?
That was a different theater, the RKO Grand on Fordham Road and Jerome Avenue. My father bought it, I guess in the late '50s, and Loehmann's was the dress house. The cut-rate dress house was expanding into the Bronx, and he put Loehmann's on the ground floor with an entrance off of Fordham Road, and built a second floor for them. Left the ground floor on Jerome Avenue vacant, and we made a deal with Bohacs, because they were coming into the Bronx. And then there was a fourth floor that we fit inside this theater, and Internal Revenue Service took that space.
Now, what about one of the first buildings that you and your dad got involved with was at 315 Hudson Street?
That was, well, my father and I, or my father and I was there also, built apartment houses on the Upper East Side and on the West Side, in partners with Phil Rosen, who was also a neighbor of my parents up in New Rochelle. They built at 84th and Madison, and we built at 66th in Amsterdam. And then we also built at 83rd and Lexington. As a matter of fact, that was the first apartment
that you lived in, right?
After
you got married.
Yeah. And I paid market rent for the apartments. It was 2-bedroom and a dining area and 2 terraces for $275 a month.
Good times then.
And we made money at 275.
Now, what happened? Because I know I mean, you've people. I mean, the family, and one of the great things about the Resnick organization is the loyalty to your people, like Ricky Rackow and others, and Marvin Wax, and so on. There were two buildings, and Arnie Penna talks about 250 Hudson, but 250 Hudson and 315 Hudson. Tell me about both of them.
315 Hudson Street was the manufacturing plant for the Henry Heidi Candy Company. Made jujubes and I guess other little candies. And they were moving out to either New Brunswick, New Jersey, or just Brunswick, New Jersey. They're moving the whole operation out. So my father bought these two buildings. They were four individual buildings on Hudson Street, Van Dam to Spring. And the entrance, the loading entrance, was right off of Hudson Street. And the idea was to fill in that courtyard where the loading dock was, with 8 elevators and toilets, and to rent the building out to, I guess primarily it was going to be storage and quote back office.
And then subsequently you got the Social Security Administration, I think, or?
That was 250.
Okay.
It took a while to build the building. It was a terrible, terrible job to do. We had to drive piles in this courtyard because Monetta Creek ran directly under it, and the building was actually sitting on the bed of the creek. Heidi had used some of the water from the creek for their manufacturing. And one of the first tenants we got in the building was Bankers Trust Company, because they were moving when the World Trade Center, the Port Authority started condemning all the area down on Day Street and all the area where the World Trade Center sat. Bankers Trust Company had a storage operation down there. And we made the deal for, I guess, about half the building or a third of the building. And I remember the rent was $1 a foot. And then the rest of it, we put them in, and the rest of the building was a book publisher and other odds and ends.
What about 250 Hudson?
250 Hudson came for sale. Social Security moved out of there. I think they went out to Lefrak City
In Queens.
in Queens, and the building was empty. The owner at the time made a deal with my father. He bought the building, and we put printers in there because that was the
printing
area.
district, right? Which subsequently, I mean, today you've gone through a major renovation. You've made even a LEED certified building.
A LEED certified building with a roof garden on the roof. The building is 100% rented to a big PR company, a privately owned PR company, Edelman and Company, and a law firm is in there. A very eclectic kind of tenancy.
I know one of the developers who's there too. I was in his office.
Right.
DDG. Now, what comes first? Madison Avenue office building at 485, or
We bought that in the 70s.
you bought that? But
You got to go
what-
back to the 60s.
Okay, let's go back to the 60s. When did you go to, was it 883rd Avenue?
Yes.
What happens over there?
There was a piece of land for sale. My father bought it. It was a piece of land that held around a corner. There was a bar there in the corner. And the bar was 20 by 70, and the piece of land was about 7,000 or 8,000 feet without the corner. And we built an office building there.
Right, which subsequently now is right next to the, no longer called Citicorp Center. It's called 601 Lexington Avenue. They changed the name.
Well, it was Citicorp when it was built.
Right, it was built. Citicorp was right adjacent.
And we were the only building on the whole block that was not owned by Citicorp.
Now, You were one of the visionaries at 110 East 58th Street, 110 East 59th Street, where your office is today. Because at one time, 57th Street was like a dividing line.
Yeah, everything. Well, there was
For office buildings, I mean.
the first office building that Harold and Percy Uris ever built was at 505 Park, which they rented it to the Arabian American Oil Company at that time. CBS had a building at just off the corner of Park Avenue that they wanted to dispose of. So my father, or we bought it, and it was an L-shaped plot. Most of it was 75 feet on 59th Street and about 140 feet on Lexington Avenue, on 58th Street. At the east side of the plot, there was a New York Public Library, freestanding. So we bought that from the city because the city owned the land, with the proviso that we would put a public library back in.
Which is still there today.
And we built that building. It was 500,000 feet, and the first tenant, if I remember correctly, was two publishing companies that was owned by the Times Mirror Company. And the rent was $6 a foot.
How'd you get to Lower Manhattan? I mean, you were on Hudson Street.
Take the subway.
Yeah, and how'd you get down to the seaport?
That was the 80s already.
Right, I know.
New York Telephone Company had a piece of land at the seaport. It was before the Seaport Plaza. The seaport area was developed by Rouse and the city of New York. This was in that area. The telephone company had no use for the building. It had zoning for 700,000 feet. And we knew that because of the height of the floors that the phone company needed, we could fit more floors in and still keep the envelope of the building, which we did. We bought the land from the phone company. With Sandy Lindenbaum, the great zoning lawyer, who was a very dear friend of mine, worked on it with us, and we were able to keep the envelope the same way and build an office building that was about 1 million square feet in the existing envelope.
Now, during the 70s and 80s, you were also very involved in the construction of certain major residential buildings on the east side, and I mean, one of them was 900 Park Avenue.
We built 900 Park Avenue.
What was over there, at that site? I mean,
it was a mansion, one of the old mansions on Park Avenue. I think it was the Pulitzer family owned it. And we bought, at that time, no, it was owned by the Egyptian government who owned it. And we bought it from them. There's a whole story about, we bought it just before Yom Kippur, and we had to close it because, being observant, a Kol Nidre came and that was it. And I think the ambassador was leaving to go back to Egypt, and things were not as peaceful as everybody hoped it would be. But P.S., that's a whole other story.
and then
we signed contract. We built this building on Park Avenue, which ultimately, and it was a rental. Ultimately, we sold it to the Goulitis family
who converted
from Chicago, who converted it to a condo.
And then you did on 72nd Street a couple of the...
We built at 72nd Street a co-op, and on 79th Street a co-op. 80th Street we built a rental, which we still own, 80th and Lex. And
First Avenue and 81st Street.
Well, that's the same one.
Right. And then you also built the condominium right near New York Cornell and Hospital for Special Surgery and the Oxford.
72nd Street, right.
Right. And then a number of years later, you went and you bought a property from Chrysler, I think, where the Symphony House
Well,
is.
yeah, my father had owned that property in the early 60s. It was when that was really Automobile Row. And Chrysler had a showroom. Chrysler closed that showroom at that time, and he bought the property from them. We tore it down after Chrysler moved out, and we built a apartment house there with a 250,000-foot office complex on the base.
And then a couple of years later, you went to 50th and 8th Avenue.
All that was, that was in the last 10 years. We built at 50th Street and 8th Avenue, a 80-20, which was built under financing with the New York State Housing Finance Agency.
Where you put the Palm Restaurant and
Palm is there, and they're still there, and the Food Emporium, I guess it's still called Food Emporium, is there, and there's a restaurant there, another restaurant on the corner, which we subsequently sold to Archstone when they came in and made the big play into New York.
Now, when did you buy 52 Broadway?
52 Broadway was before that.
But that's an important thing on 52 Broadway because that was one of the few leases signed in Lower Manhattan after 9/11.
There's a story before it how 52 Broadway came about. 52 Broadway, we bought, a Greek shipping company owned it, and it was vacant, except for Blumberg, the legal forms on the ground floor on Broadway. And at that time, a lot of these old buildings were being converted to
Residential at that time.
residential. So we had plans for to convert it to a residential building. As a matter of fact, the name of the partnership that owns it is 52 Habitat Company, so, and that's still the name of the partnership. We did a lot of business with Chemical Bank at the time, and Chemical Bank was selling their property at 20 Pine Street. And we were thinking about building, instead of an apartment house at 52 Broadway, of building an office building. It was a 10 or 12-story building with a big courtyard, and our plans were to fill the courtyard in and to add on top of the building. We did engineering. We were able to hold additional floors. The 20 Pine Street, we bought 20 Pine Street from Chemical Bank, and they were going to move part of their operation into 52 Broadway. So it was a pretty delicate negotiation of setting the price at 20 Pine Street and setting the rental at 52 Broadway. Accomplished all of it. Chemical moved into 20 Pine Street. 52 Broadway, Chemical moved out of the 52 Broadway, and they stayed there for a while. There was a phase out and moved into 52 Broadway. When Chemical moved out of 20 Pine Street, Morgan Guarantee Trust Company at that time needed, quote, back office space for their personnel department, their benefits department, stuff like that. Interesting, you talk about Chase, which is One Chase Plaza, and Chemical Bank. 52 Broadway, Chemical Bank moved out just pre 9/11. And we had to rent it. 9/11 happened, and the rental market downtown, there was none. The United Federation of Teachers
And sold their building uptown.
has sold their building uptown and had to move. Some brokers brought them to us, and we made a deal at 52 Broadway. Who was it? I guess it was it was Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg wanted to make an announcement after 9/11 occurred, because this was the first major lease.
First major lease in Lower Manhattan. after
Lower
9/11.
Manhattan. It was 350,000 feet. Randy Weingarten and I did not sign the lease. We shook hands. Mike Bloomberg made the press announcement in the lobby of 52 Broadway. Randy and I were there with the mayor. Ultimately, we did sign the lease.
Okay. With 2 minutes left, I know that one of the other buildings afterwards that you and your sons did was 200 Chambers, which became a very successful condominium and retail. And now let's talk about, you have 3 sons?
I have 3 sons.
What are their names? And
Scott is my oldest son. Jonathan is my middle son. And Peter's my younger son. All 3 were in business with me up until about a year ago. Scott decided to go out on his own and to do real estate deals on his own. He did do a couple of real estate deals. Right now he's involved in one on his own.
he's married to?
He's married to Kim, and they have 3 children.
Names?
Julianne, who yesterday went to her 6th birthday party. James and Elizabeth, and Kim has a son also, Jack, who is living with them. My son Jonathan, who is still with us and is now the president of the company. His wife's name is Joelle, and they have 2 sons, Jacob and Eli. And my son Peter, who is now living in Boulder, Colorado, doing venture capital work. Left us just about the time that Scott left. And his wife is Andrea. And our first grandchildren were his twins, Quinn and Alex, and their daughter, Caroline. So 8 grandchildren in 7 years.
So all I have to say is,
And still married to the same woman at almost 50 years.
you are one of the families, as we say, and I'm really happy that I've had the Resnick family today on my show. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.